everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Black Men Speak. Our mission is to change the narrative about Black men by changing the narrator to Black men. I'm the host, Shauna Love, and I'm here with my co-host and my brother, Kimani Pasai. Hi, Ki.
What's up, world? How you doing, Shauna?
I'm good. Kimani and I are super excited to introduce our guest today. Our guest is Pearcey Bastiani, and Pearcey is a graduate from the University of San Francisco. He majored in marketing and minored in public service and community engagement. He worked, when I first met Pearcey a few months ago, he had 3 jobs and was running 2 small businesses. So he's very entrepreneurial and a very determined and committed individual who's focused on his own personal success. He has recently left one of his jobs at the African American Art and Culture Center to focus more on his training, because he is training for his black belt in Taekwondo, hoping to go to the Olympics one day. It is my great pleasure to introduce Pearcey Bastiani. Hi, Pearcey. How are you?
Hi, doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Pearcey and I got to know each other a little bit prior to this interview, and I explained to him the project, and he got so excited about it right away. I was just really moved by his enthusiasm. As you all know, our prompt every episode is, what's hurting Black men? And that conjures up a lot for most of the people who are attracted to this project. So I am eager to hear your experience, your personal impressions, and your life experience, Pearcey. So from your vantage point as a young, entrepreneurial, young Black man, what's hurting Black men?
Well, the first thing that popped into my head was education. I spent the last year and a half, I'd say, in the Black Teacher Project, which is something that started in Oakland, I believe. They have a chapter in Oakland, New York City, and San Francisco. And just although I'm not a teacher myself, in my experience hearing from what the teachers have to say, it's striking me that our education system isn't designed for people of color. And reason being is that the majority of the schools that these teachers are coming from, they're usually one, if not a handful of teachers that are of color. And so when you're a Black or brown youth growing in through these education systems, intersectionalities are really hard to be brought up on if your instructor doesn't look like you. And what has happened, especially like when Black History Month or MLK Day, or even certain holidays for like Kwanzaa, the teachers that are not of color don't feel it's in their lane, or that they're trained the right way to really get to those topics. So if there's somebody of color that's on staff, they like to let that person just handle it. And that not only puts a lot of pressure on the Black teacher, but that also really creates more of a disconnect between the educator and the student. And so now if you're a young Black boy, young Black girl, and we're hyper intelligent beings, and we quote unquote start acting out, now that disconnect means the teacher isn't going to understand any kind of cultural differences or intricacies between herself or himself and the student. And essentially, when the students don't have that connection with their teacher, automatically they're going to feel less inclined to want to participate just like their other students. And our Black and brown youth end up being the ones that get sent to the principal more often, put on suspension, get detentions, and there's more punitive actions that get placed on our students simply because of things of them acting out. But again, if there were more teachers of color to really help to make the students more comfortable in the classroom space, then we would start to see foundationally that our Black men and our youth are going to be able to grow into themselves similarly to the rest of their students. But that's just not what I've been seeing right now. And the teachers from anywhere from elementary to middle and even high school, I'm seeing issues just for our students all across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, I went through school. I didn't make it into college, but I've never had a Black teacher. And, Black History Month was the extent of anything that I heard of about Black people as far as history, and it was the same thing. It was we were slaves, and then we're not. You know what I'm saying? And it's like there was so much that I learned about my culture, about my people through my family, and then also through, talking to Black men afterwards as I grew up. But even not just for Black people, but for white people too, they don't know too much about us because there's nothing, it's not in the curriculum. It's not a part of the major history of this country besides slavery.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting topic, and we talk about this a lot. I was just telling my brother that I'm hoping to have a meeting soon in the next couple of weeks, actually, with the superintendent of SFUSD, San Francisco Unified School District, to talk about possibilities of creating some type of learning experience or curriculum around the Black Men Speak project. And part of it is because I want to address the same issue that you just talked about. Young Black people do not get an opportunity to see themselves or to know themselves through the lens of the Black experience coming up through regular public education. And to be fair, we are somewhere between like 10 and 13% of the population of the United States of America. And so some people might even argue, well, why do you think that you're so special that you need this like specific curriculum for you? You have a whole month dedicated to you. Why do you need anything more? And I've heard people, of other ethnicities say things like that. And it poses a lot of different problems for us, or a lot of at least things that we need to think through. Number one, our history in the United States is unique because of how we were brought here, forced to be here, and how much we've contributed to the foundation of this country, the economic prosperity of this country. So there really would not be a thriving economic country called the United States of America had it not been for all of the free labor that was provided through slavery. And I think Ta-Nehisi Coates made a really eloquent point about that in the reparations hearings that just took place last month. That's one part of it. And then the other part is because we are such a small part of the population, how are we going to get a Black teacher in every classroom? It just doesn't seem feasible. So I'm wondering if you've thought about like cultural competency training for teachers and other ways to meet the needs of Black children in the classroom when they don't have the token representative, Black female or Black male in the classroom to help the non-Black teachers relate, to our kids.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that it's certainly feasible and doable. And for me, going through school, there was always a special attention made to Western civilization, European history. Classical literature is always Europeans. So it certainly seems that they can make room for certain cultures. Excuse me.
For their own culture.
For their own cultures. But at the end of the day, the way in society that we see the effects of how the appreciation of Black bodies is not being met is simply that our Black boys can be killed indiscriminately in the streets, either by a uniformed officer or sometimes even by people who look like us. Because if we don't learn to love ourselves in school, how do you expect the adults to learn to love themselves? And if you don't love yourself, how are you going to look to somebody else who looks like you and love them too? And that's what makes it so easy for these gun violences to be unfortunately plagued within our community.
Yeah, that's one of the contributing factors for sure. Just sticking on education for a little while, can you talk a little bit about where you grew up, what kind of schools you went to, K through 12, before college, and what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, I moved around a lot as a kid, and so I went to a lot of different schools. So fortunately for me, that gave me a lot of different perspectives on education. I'd say my first couple of years, I went to a private religious school. It was a Seventh-day Adventist school over in Berryessa, California. I myself am from San Jose, and I stayed there from like pre-K, kindergarten through finishing first grade. Then me and my family moved up here to where I'm at now in Santa Rosa for about 4 years. So I went to a public school up here in Santa Rosa from second grade to fifth grade, moved back down to San Jose, finished elementary school for sixth grade, and then continued going to a public school seventh and eighth grade. Went back to a private school for high school. This time it was a Catholic high school, and that really landed the most for me, because in that school I learned more about social justice, the importance of service, and respect of other people's religions and practices. And really, when I started pursuing college, the religious upbringing really had such a impact on me that I really only focused on other semi-religious or whichever colleges. So I ended up landing with the University of San Francisco, as you mentioned, and that school being a Jesuit school. So I really had a strong hand both in the private side of schools as well as public side of schools, and they both made their impacts in their own ways, for sure. And the demographics, it never really varied too much, simply because here in the Bay Area there already is even less amount of Black people than there is on like the national average.
Yeah. Did you find that some schools were more diverse than others, like from private to public or from city to city?
In different ways. Like Santa Rosa, definitely there's more Caucasians. However, there was still a fair amount of Latino students, and the same goes for San Jose, except in San Jose there would probably be more Indian and Asian students versus up here in Santa Rosa. But still, like the percentage of Black folk, you can count the amount of students in your class on one hand, and your quote unquote, not just your classroom, but just your total class. There's still only less than maybe 10 usually Black students. And now if we start going into specifics to say who's mixed and who's not, then that ratio gets even smaller. One of the things back in high school that was very poignant to me was in my particular graduating class, there were no male fully Black men. All the males that were Black were mixed of some sort. And we felt that was very poignant, in the sense that there was nobody to really just own it. We all had something going on. And yeah, it was an interesting dynamic, for sure.
Yeah.
How do you think that shaped you going to these schools and being like one of 5 Black kids? How did it affect you in terms of shaping your identity of who you are as I assume a biracial? Are you biracial Black
Yeah.
man?
Mm-hmm.
And how did that help shape your identity, just in terms of your Blackness, your Africanness, and how you relate to other people?
Well, definitely the public schools had a heavier emphasis, I would say, on vocabulary, and I feel that once I was starting to go through high school, and some of the friends that I was still connected to at the time from middle school, there was a bit of a separation that was happening in terms of my personal vocabulary. And I noticed that people were starting to call me whitewashed because I didn't talk street. And just growing up in San Jose, mostly because I really didn't have much of a Black influence, whether besides what I saw on TV or just like, I guess, read about. I feel, well, on the one hand, definitely, as I said, the whitewashed factor. Two is that for a long time, I really didn't have any attraction to Black women or Black girls, simply because, again, from San Jose, I never saw any example of a beautiful Black woman, in my opinion. It really wasn't until I got to college that really started to like break for me. And so really growing up, I felt more in tune. I'm half Mexican. I felt more in tune with my Mexican side. My mom's side of the family, which is the Mexican side, they're all in San Jose. My dad's side is East Coast and in Alabama. So it having one half be more like at home and the other half is just less of a connection. It really it left me without a full self, I feel, for a long time. Again, going back to those kind of jeery remarks that I was getting. And it really didn't start to change and open up for me until I attended my sister's Black graduation at San Jose State. And there I saw Black Greek organizations for the first time. And that opened up a whole new Pandora's box for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with that, Luckily for me, I had a core group of Black friends that I went to school with all through high school. Junior high, I didn't have any, but all through high school. And, I think the fact that we were together, but there was some other kids, especially the other mixed kids. I'm mixed myself, but for some reason, I've always been accepted by the other the darker skinned people. For some reason, I don't know why, but you know what I'm saying? Maybe I had a little more street slang or whatever. But I remember watching other kids who I went to school with who were mixed, and they had the same thing. They didn't have that connection. And when you don't have that connection and you don't have the history that's being taught to you, then you think that being Black is the street slang. You know what I'm saying? You think being Black is the ghetto. And if that's not your thing, then you're not connected to that at all. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the thing, because Blackness is not ghetto. Blackness is not ignorant. You know what I'm saying? Blackness is not violent. You know what I'm saying? It's people are. But just because you're not that doesn't mean you're not Black. And I think that was a tragedy for a lot of mulatto kids that I went to school with.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think it's interesting. I think this, Kimani, is the first time that we've had an episode of Black Men Speak where all three of us were biracial. Yeah. And it definitely is an interesting conversation to have, right? Because I think all three of us, from what I just heard, had this exact same experience. Pearcey, you might find it fascinating also that our father is Black, our mother, Kimani and I have different moms. Both of our moms are like white and Jewish. And our dad and all of his family, for the most part of our lives, have been on the East Coast. So all we had here was our white mothers, our siblings who are all biracial, few Black folks in our community and at our school. And we had to learn Blackness the same way like white people learn Blackness for the most part, through the media. And all you get are those stereotypes. And you're like, wow, but I'm not that. I'm not a gangster. I'm not ghetto. I'm not, I don't fall into like the pimp hoe framework that they want to stereotype us with. And I don't speak street. My dad, when Kimani and I, when I was little, our dad forbade us from using slang. We were forbidden. And my dad was very clear, like, no, I want you to speak proper. By the time Kimani was coming up through middle school and high school, our dad was sick. And so he wasn't really active in Kimani's upbringing. He had a long-term illness. So Kimani, kind of like, learned his own way. He didn't have a father figure there. And he turned to the streets like so many young Black men to get that leadership and that example of what Black manhood is, which is why there's such a difference in age and in life experience between my brother and I. But I think it's just absolutely fascinating how many biracial Black people, like all of us, discover their Blackness later in life and learn to understand what it means not to be Black, but to know that you are African, that we are African people, who have just been separated from our motherland for so long. And our Africanness is inseparable from who we are, regardless of what our socioeconomic status is, regardless of even biraciality or where we grew up.
Absolutely. And even more importantly, as we get older, I think we also get more access to the greater span of history, so that we continue to unlock more and more information that was hidden from us, that, well, obviously isn't told in public school, but even just the significance of the Egyptian civilization on the entire world. But I feel like, that just, on that quick example, Egypt is talked about a lot, like it's some special place that is not African. Like Egypt is in Africa, but Egypt and the people that are in it are black. And what kind of grinds my gears a little bit is when these films that are made nowadays, something about Egypt, there's one that was made with Russell Crowe, and it's like they continue to cast non-black or even African people in these films, and yet we're expected to believe in this kind of fallacy. Yet Egypt is one of the oldest civilizations ever, and yet we're supposed to just believe that they're not black.
Right, and even worse, Pearcey, they always cast those like white actors in these Egyptian roles, and they always have either an American or a British accent. Have you noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime Hollywood does a classic film or a period piece, doesn't matter what part of the world it is, they always give them one of two accents. It's either American or it is British, anywhere in the world where the story takes place. And I think that that is such an insidious tactic to perpetuate this notion of white supremacy, where white people think that they've been everywhere and that they've done everything, and all of history's accomplishments are attributable to them.
Or how about we brought you civilization?
Exactly.
No, Africa brought you civilization.
Right.
Exactly.
Education, cleanliness, you know what I'm saying? All of that. And
arithmetic.
yeah, even outside, I mean,
Math, science, all of it.
Outside of, Egypt, like there were so many kingdoms that were just as big in Africa that we don't know anything about. I hear tales of things here and there, but I don't even really know. Like I would really have to take time to really figure it out and pick the brains and look behind the curtain and find the people who do know. And that's part of what going back to what you were saying is, how am I supposed to feel good growing up in school and learning about all these great accomplishments that other people did and nothing about what we did, especially when those people got most of that stuff from us in the first place.
Right.
That's right.
And then I'm getting told to it by a white guy in a class with all mostly white kids, and you expect me to be feeling like I want to be here or I'm included in this.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was when I discovered Herodotus, who was a Greek historian. And so when we think about Greek history and we think about that time period of like the height of Greek culture, we think, wow, that was like a couple thousand years ago. It was so long ago. But they had people then who were historians who were looking back thousands of years, if not hundreds of years before them. And Herodotus is one of the people who actually traveled to Africa, learned as much as he could about Egypt and other parts of Africa, brought it back to Greece, and raved and wrote copious volumes about the glory of African civilization, how things were done there, the types of accomplishments, agricultural accomplishments, the way they understood astronomy, the math, the science, all of those things that were super accomplished. Another big aha moment for me is when I discovered this book called They Came Before Columbus. I used to know the author's name off the top of my head, and my friend Ishmael Reed, who I interviewed for an earlier episode of Black Men Speak, actually has a nonprofit foundation called the Before Columbus Foundation. And if you read They Came Before Columbus, it really talks all about the Mali Empire. When we hear about the British Empire, we hear about the Roman Empire. We don't ever hear about we hear about Chinese empires and ancient Indian civilization. We hear about Incas and Mayans. We never hear about the Mali Empire, which is one of the greatest empires ever established on Earth. And to this day, and I just found this out recently, to this day, the single richest man to ever walk on planet Earth, ever.
Mansa Musa.
Exactly, from the Mali Empire. Exactly. And the book They Came Before Columbus talks about how during the height of the Mali Empire, King Abubakar III put together an envoy of like 4 or 5 ships, the same way that Christopher Columbus did, but hundreds of years, if not several hundred years before Columbus, and sent them over across the Atlantic to what we now know as the Americas. But when King Abubakar came over, he did not come over to oppress, to enslave, to to colonize. He came over to share information, knowledge, and wisdom. So he packed up 4 huge ships with their best scientists, their best doctors, their best, all the best of their flora and the fauna. He almost did like a Noah's Ark, brought animals, brought plants, brought food, brought the best of their technology, their seafarers, all of that, brought it to what we now know as the Americas or the Western world, went all the way from like the southern tip of the Americas all the way up through Canada, which is why to this day you'll find pyramids at the base of the ocean. You'll find pyramids on land. In the southern part of Africa, there's this enormous figure of an African bust from like the waist up of an African man in the Yucatan. All of the evidence, there's plants, there's food, there's all these things here that originated in Africa because they brought it over. But they didn't come here to conquer. They came here for cultural exchange, which is absolutely mind-blowing when you think about the difference of mentality between what Europeans did versus what Africans did.
Right. And what a lot of people seem to forget is that Africa is in the state that it is now, in a lot of sense due to colonialism. And people don't know about the Berlin Conference of, I believe it was like 1898 or 1880 something. But essentially that conference is what allowed all the European powers to come up and decide that, oh, let's go colonize different parts of Africa. So Germany gets the Central African Republic area, and Italy gets Ethiopia, the Dutch get Congo, the British get South Africa, and all of these things. And over that course of almost 100 years, for depending on which country, all the maps that we know of now were all drawn up during this time. And the idea of Africa being in the name in and of itself, we aren't taught that Africa used to be Kemet,
Right.
or actually the various names, but Kemet is one of the oldest names that they could find, I believe, in the ancient Egyptian history logs.
Yeah.
It's
a part of Africa, which is like just below Egypt, sub-Saharan Africa. The original name for South Africa is Azania. And so these regions, they had names for themselves. And those names have changed over time, right? But yeah, the names that were given by the colonizers are not the original names, and they're not the original identity. But it's amazing how European colonization, has changed world history to such an extreme that there's almost no place on the planet where the people don't have a colonized mentality, where the economy and the culture and the cultural identity of indigenous native people hasn't been radically shifted as a result of European colonization.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you saying Mansa Musa didn't talk like street nigga?
He didn't talk like Snoop Dogg, no. He really didn't. No.
Okay. He didn't
And
bang
he had more money than Jay-Z. Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising. But those are the people that they want to reward, right? I put together a video recently that had a lot of different images. I was putting together ideas for the Black Men Speak project, and I came across the name of a guy who, I shouldn't even bring it up because I don't think I'm going to be able to remember his name right now, but he is the richest Black man in the world today, and he's a billionaire. And when I came across his image and his name, I was shocked that I had never heard of him. And in the billionaire club, I don't think I've ever seen a black male. Like, we all know Oprah's there. Allegedly, Jay-Z is now there. And you hear about Jay-Z all the time, right? But yet this other dude is far richer, and I never heard of his name, right? He's not being celebrated in the media. He's not being held up on a pedestal. And again, I don't want to keep like shouting out the Black Men Speak Project, but that's part of the reason why we're doing this, is to make sure that we are shining a light on the people who are making accomplishments and contributing to our culture, and to just change the narrative about Black men by saying, hey, let's focus on these guys, as well. Yeah, let's focus on the pain. Let's focus on the struggle. Let's come up with some solutions to these problems. Let's be open and have this dialogue. But also, look at all these guys that are doing amazing things that we know it goes all the way back through history. We don't have to go all the way back, 2,000 or 3,000 years to Kemet and Egypt. We don't have to go back to slavery or the Reconstruction era. We can look at any point in human history and see accomplishments, significant accomplishments of Black people and Black men. Okay, like over and over and over again. So all we have to do is just start mining this information and sharing it out to make sure that young Black men, or Black men of any age, who are starting to connect back to who they are, to own themselves, to own their identity, to feel whole again, that they have the information there available to support that.
And I think one important piece to interconnect history and how the Black man is able to find himself in, whether it's the United States or just wherever the diaspora has taken an individual, is their knowledge of their family history. And one of the things that at the African American Art and Culture Complex that I really did enjoy was that the Historical Society there was undergoing genealogy workshops, so that folks had, if nothing else, at least an opportunity to sit down and really do some hard research into their family lineage. And whether they started at square one, or some family members had pieced together some photo books and they had a little bit more evidence to work through, the Historical Society was able to guide them through different types of research and or resources and organizations that had semblances of information that they could pick from. For my family, back in November 2017, Facebook managed to reconnect us to the family we have in Alabama. My entire life, I didn't even realize that I still had family in Alabama. I just thought it was the few aunts and uncles that my dad had, shown me when we took our trips to the East Coast. But the beauty of social media has exploded in that amount of people who I know to be in my family. So I think that, we're in a special time and place that we have this amount of information available, but I think it's really important that Black men are given an opportunity to really at least attempt to track their lineage past like their grandfather at least, because that period right after the Civil War, or even a little bit before, some folks have documentation, some folks don't, but you won't know unless you look. And for my family, we found in it was either 1854 or 1858, out of Abbeville, Alabama, Henry County, a receipt of sale for an estate for I was a Thomas Kelly. And when he passed away, his entire estate was sold. The receipt book, which is still in, my aunt took a picture of it from the county booklet. It was like 47 acres of land for like a couple thousand. And then it starts listing names. And this is where it gets real trippy. It says like this, this man, the name, a man, the kind of a tentative age, price. And it just goes down the list. And then you see Margaret, a girl, 12 years old, sold for $2,000. And Margaret Kelly is like my great ancestor, and she took on the master's last name of Kelly, and she married a William Turner, who birthed my grandmother's mother, and they, really all stayed around in Abbeville, Alabama. And once my grandmother and her sister were born, I think they were raised there till their like late teens, early 20s. My grandmother's sister stayed in Alabama, and my grandmother moved to the East Coast, where she met my grandfather, who was from Guyana. And he came over, I think, in like the 40s during the wartime to work some of the tobacco fields up here. But all of this stuff just came up within the last 2 years.
Wow.
So, just goes to show, like, it may be you, it may be a family member, but even just to trace something back to that slave receipt, it was profoundly life-changing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. Have you had an opportunity to connect with any of your family in or from Alabama? Have you like been able to go back and, meet people? Have you connected with them online, had phone calls or anything like that?
Yeah. All my life, I had never had like a true to form Black family reunion experience. And we've seen the Tyler Perry movies, so we've seen like kind of the cinematic examples of that, and everybody's doing the line dances and stuff.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I think, yeah, like last year, really, last summer, that I finally had an opportunity. Some of the family from Alabama had also moved to the New England area, but I didn't know that they were up there. So a lot of the folks that are in the New England area and a few from Alabama came up and did a little family reunion up in the New England area. And then this year, I got my first opportunity to go to Alabama in January. And although I wasn't able to physically meet with my family there, I was able to at least, be on the phone with them and be in the same state or the next state over from a few folks that are in Georgia. And even that was just like powerful enough for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hopeful that I can get a chance to meet with them in person, if not this year, the next year.
Yeah.
But it's still
Wonderful.
beautiful, finally I get to have to share that experience too.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
is really beautiful.
I had a question for you. Being mulatto or mixed. I don't know why I keep saying mulatto. I don't know if I ever use that word,
It's all good.
but being mixed, growing up and not really having that connection with your Black side, what was how did you put that together with your Mexican side? And how did you, what's the word I'm looking for? How did you,
Like reconcile.
yeah, how did you reconcile what you were and who you were with those two sides having the heavy influence on your Mexican side and the lighter influence on your Black side?
Well, my dad was very present in my life, and whether it was in my sports growing up
Yeah.
or just like the important school events, he was always a presence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt um, I never really had a, a complex of being to this or to that.
Mm-hmm.
I do recall a period of time in elementary school where percentages of myself came up somehow, like, oh, I'm like X percentage Black, X percentage like Mexican, and like a sliver of like Cherokee. And I remember like drawing that out a lot. And I think I did that for a few years because I don't know who gave me those numbers, but they kind of just stuck in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's how it made sense in my head a little bit. And then finally, like my dad kind of just like broke that, because there's no way to really judge percentages of yourself.
Yeah.
And one really shouldn't do that, I feel, because it's almost like you're saying, this is Black half and this is Mexican half right here. And, it's just not realistic. It's evenly throughout. It's all interwoven.
Yeah. My mother was, she's Jewish, and she's not really into religion, into Judaism. She's really not involved in the Jewish community. So our history was not really told to me, and I didn't really learn it too much. So my whole life, I was the Black guy, at my school, of
Mm-hmm.
white people, I was the Black guy. So luckily for me, which going back to what I said before, that was what I was. That was my identity, even though I'm part Jewish too. Come to find out, part English, part Irish, a little bit of Spanish, a whole bunch of stuff. But I've always been the black guy. So luckily for me, when growing up, that was who I was, and that's what I clung to. But I just know so many kids who just don't have that same clarity, and they fight with it for so long, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, Kimani, another thing that you and I have in common with both of our moms. Neither of our moms were really culturally involved in the Jewish world. Yeah. And so I wasn't raised with any kind of Jewish cultural background either, religious or cultural. And so I always just identified as Black. And people would say, would ask me, like, what's your ethnicity? And I'd be, I'm Black. Like, how dumb are you? Can't you tell? By looking at me. And then they would have to follow up and say, well, what are you mixed with? And I would go, oh, okay, yeah, well, I am mixed, but I'm Black, Mm-hmm. It took me a long time, even growing up without a lot of Black influence, I always just identified as Black, but didn't really know quite how to define that or how to express that or what that meant. I just knew that it's what I was, and I knew that that was how society looked at me, and it was how I looked at myself. And again, my dad our dad wasn't that present in my life either. I would say by the time I was in high school, I hardly ever saw my dad. And then he kind of resurfaced a little bit later. And when he resurfaced, he was shortly thereafter diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And then shortly after that, he was alive but unreachable, and remained that way for about 15 years until he ultimately passed. But just having like this parent, dark brown skinned parent who you see on a regular basis, who like, this is my parent. It helps you to like, no matter how light your skin is, no matter what you're mixed with, to say, but I know who I am. Mm-hmm. But I know that I'm Black. I don't quite know what that means to other people. I don't quite know, if all other Black people will accept me, or what they might think of me, as being one of them, or any of that, or how I talk or how I look, or for me particularly, the grade of my hair, the color of my eyes, all of that stuff. But I know that I'm Black, and that's always been that thing that has been, has guided me throughout my life. Interestingly enough, I went to Spelman College, and that was one of my attempts to to get into, just to be immersed in Blackness, because I missed it so much and I craved it so much, and I was so tired of feeling like a minority, and adapting to other people's cultural norms and cultural expectations, that I had to like pick up, literally, like had 2 weeks worth of money, sent all of my stuff through the US Post Office, and hopped on a Greyhound bus to Atlanta just to be in Blackness. And I didn't apply to Spelman until I got to Atlanta. All I knew is I was leaving the state because I wanted to be in a Black environment, period. And so someone in the Bay Area said, in Atlanta, you can go all day without seeing a white person. And I literally moved to Atlanta on the strength of that one statement.
Yeah, like for me too, my senior year, I had a choice, and there's one school in my area that's right next to the ghetto, and it has all the Black kids basically in my whole county there. And my senior year, I was like, I'm going. I hopped on a bus every single day and traveled miles and hopped different buses and got to school every day until I got my car. And then as soon as I graduated, I moved straight to Oakland, and yeah. I had to get into it, even though I had that anyways, because of my friends, and we had our core group, and we were pretty we were pretty secure in who we were and all that, and knew the culture. But it was just like, I have to get out of here. I need to immerse myself in this. And that made it, I think what added to that was the fact that you don't hear anything about Black people in school, you know, so for slavery. I need to know more. I need to know who I was, you know, I need to know my history. And unfortunately, even after school, it's hard to find that.
Yeah, and to build that community.
Build that community, yeah.
You know, and when you're young, you can't always put your finger on it.
No.
You can't always identify or articulate exactly what that yearning is, or what that disconnect is. Like, something doesn't feel right. I don't really know what it is, because you're still learning yourself. You're still shaping your identity. You're still understanding the world around you and all the different forces at play. I know for me, by the time I was like, I want to be immersed in Blackness and I need to get away, I had been in junior college for a few years, and I had joined this study group, this Black study group, and we were doing all of our own independent research on Black history and, you know, Black nationalism, Black leaders, and all that stuff. And it was through that I had my awakening, and I was just like, oh, this is it. This is it. You know, I was finally able to say, put my finger on it, you know. We started off this conversation talking about education and how there's not enough attention and cultural relevance and cultural connectivity for young Black men and young Black people in public school education or even in private school. But you also said something else, Pearcey, about how that impacted you growing up. And you talked about how you discovered the beauty of Black women and how you hadn't really had that growing up because your mom's not Black, so you didn't have that, you know, beautiful Black woman, strong Black woman role model in the home. You didn't really have it in school. What was it like for you to get to college and all of a sudden have this kind of awakening about, you know, the attraction and the beauty of Black women?
I think it still took a little time even when I did get to college, but I would say definitely like my sophomore year, because that's when I became an alpha, and almost like it was almost like opening the floodgates. Like not that there was like a big surge of like some like interest or whatever, but I think really just being able to be exposed to other schools that in Greek life and in the parties and everything. And then I also had my first Black girlfriend when I was a sophomore in college. Uh, and I think there's like all of that happened around the same time. And it was never necessarily like, oh, I'm never going back type of thing, but at just the very fact that that, again, that world opened up. Well, you see, I'm already kind of blushing, smiling. So it was definitely, it was a very positive experience, to say the least. But it, at least while I was like with that individual, it felt really good to like be with another Black like person, and not having to explain certain things, or you know, certain things are already just assumed. But definitely one of the things that is still sticking in my head, I could never truly forget about it. Like I won't think about it for a long time, but just going back to when I was a youth, and just talking to some kid at lunch, and I was telling him something like, I'm Black, and then he just goes, not as Black as my Sharpie. And I'll never forget that, because it's just like, well, I mean, what no, you know, and
Yeah, yeah, what
it's
an
not
insult.
possible to be as Black as that Sharpie. But at the end
Yeah,
of the day, I didn't have anything to say back to that.
yeah,
And
yeah. I tell
yeah, that
people the melanin's on
always
the
sticks with me.
inside. Just tell them the melanin's on the inside. I say, don't let the white skin fool you. Don't let it fool you.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I'm a little curious, kind of segueing off of that, right? Of your attraction to Black females and the previous conversation about, you know, us all being biracial. When you think about, because you're a young man, you know, you don't have kids yet, you know, I'm sure marriage and family and all that is in your future. No, nowhere near yet. Yeah, you got what do you think about the importance of Black family And how does that affect you as you think ahead towards family planning in your future?
Well, I think, well, two things. In cinema and media, I think over the last, I wouldn't even say 5 years, really the last maybe 3 years, I've been seeing a lot more of a prevalence of Black family in media, both in film and TV. It's been popularized a lot more. So like Empire and Blackish, different other shows where you see like these really dynamic and powerful couples that are both, they're Black. And even for Blackish, because Tracy Ellis Ross, sticks to her true self as being of mixed ethnicity. um, I think that now that those conversations have gotten to that type of a level, it's a lot easier for that still to be more normalized, where for a long time I feel, going to my other point, that it's been, because I'm mixed, it's more standardized both in myself, but I think in society, for Black men to not date Black women. And maybe that doesn't necessarily mean to just go straight to a white woman, but it's more encouraged almost for Black men to date around different races and things, versus it's not so much the Black woman. And in the conversations that I've had in college and in BSU, a lot of the Black women there address that. And almost there's almost a pettiness and like a really resentful energy that comes out when these conversations happen. But it's honest truth, because the society doesn't necessarily tell the Black woman to go, date a Mexican man or an Asian man or these other things. Almost like they're telling these Black women, to wait for the Black man to come and to them. But on the flip side, the Black man is told to almost do the exact opposite. So that disconnect, it always brought up interesting conversations,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it still goes to like 50-50% maybe in my friends groups, in terms of my friends dating a Black woman versus not.
Yeah. It's a real problem, and I think people don't expect somebody who's biracial, particularly me as a biracial woman, to have the kind of viewpoints that I do. But I'm, as a woman who's always identified as Black, as a woman who's always been attracted to Black men and always sought a Black partner, I have the same experience as dark-skinned Black women or Black women who are not mixed, where you're looking for a Black man and they're looking at anything but you. And I'm a single woman to this day, and I still experience that very frequently. And one of my sisters, who's married, she was just talking about how Black men will avoid eye contact and all that kind of stuff. She's like, I'm married. I'm just being friendly. I'm saying hi I'm not trying to flirt, but they're just like, and particularly if they're with a partner who's of a different ethnicity, they go out of their way to look over you, around you, anywhere else but you. And I've noticed, and I've been tracking this for a long time, and I've been talking about it for a long time, ever since the Civil Rights Movement, the two greatest beneficiaries of the Civil Rights Movement were Black men and white women. And so that image has been the image of diversity and civil rights ever since really the 60s, but heavily in the 70s and forward. So we're talking about, like 50 years worth of this image. And you see it in media, you see it in advertisements, you see it in film, television, dance. Everywhere you look, it is always Black man, white woman, or when they do have a Black couple, it's always Black man with a dark-skinned brother with a real light-skinned sister. And I'll be honest, even being who I am, it just makes me sick. I want to see more dark-skinned women being highlighted and showcased. I don't want to necessarily see a reversal, but every now and then, can I see a dark-skinned sister with a light-skinned brother? Every now and then. You know what I mean? Can I see like two dark-skinned, people together? Not always. Like, you'll see two light-skinned people. You will rarely see in media, marketing, advertising, you will rarely see a dark-skinned man with a dark-skinned woman.
The thing about that that's so crazy to me, because even growing up the way I did, you know, I dated a lot of white girls when I was young because that's what I had access to, and I like women. So, you know, that's just what I'm gonna do. But I mean, as soon as I could, and as soon as I did, man, I want to get out, right? I wanted a sister so bad, and it's amazing to me talking to some brothers nowadays, and they're like, "Yeah, man, I just want a light skinned girl, or I want a white girl because she'll be able to do this," and it's like, I've never, like, that doesn't cross my mind, like, not even slightly. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I like sisters. Maybe it's because of my longing for connection to my blackness as a kid. I don't know. But I've always knew I wanted a sister. I married a sister. I have kids with a sister. And it's I love it, bro. It's like, it's one of the things that I hold biggest and highest in my life is that I walk around these white neighborhoods and even black neighborhoods with my 2 kids and my wife, and we're a strong black family. And I'm so proud of that. And I don't understand why so many brothers like don't want that. You know what I'm saying? Like, take that, own it, like, eat it, like, live that. There's nothing wrong with that. You know what I'm saying? And it gives me such a sense of pride. I wish other people could just see that and get over the stigmas and the stereotypes and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And because yes, we all have different cultures, and that's why black men and black women should be together. But there's plenty of strong women, period. You know what I'm saying? And you should be able to find that within your race, you know?
And not just strong women, because we get labeled as strong all the time. We are also gentle. We are also beautiful. We are also smart and peaceful and spiritual and loving and all sorts of other wonderful things, right? And I want to be really clear, like, people love who they love. And I get it. We're like 13% of the population. There's all these other people out there. You know, we're in a culture, a dominant culture, where we're seeing images of beauty and, you know, good looks from a lot of other, mostly white all the time, but other ethnicities as well. You can't control all of that. Sometimes opposites attract. We're not saying that we're against interracial relationships or anything like that. It's just saying, you know, part of the problem is that Black men have not been placing a value and a premium on Black women as they should and as Black women deserve. And part of the problem is that it's choice architecture, right? It has been designed to condition the mind from the time that we are little and we're seeing what Ken and Barbie look like, to the time that we're looking at cartoons and we see what the Disney princesses look like, you know, all the way up to, you know, high school and all the different media that we watch, you know, and it's always this image of, almost always this image of the beautiful non-Black woman, right? And white women in particular are almost always portrayed as being, still to this day, the ones who are strong and heroic and brave and standing on the, you know, on principles and values. And, you know, we see all these great stories and all of these great characters designed for white women to perpetuate and emulate this idea of their purity and their beauty and how great they are. And we continue to see Black women in the same old traditional roles, like, you're loud, you're funny, you're vulgar, you know, or you're subservient, or you're in this position, this low-level societal position. And, you know, there is a reciprocity between art and reality, right? There's a reciprocal nature there where art mimics reality, but it also creates reality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, reality mimics art, you know. And so, you know, we just have to be very conscious about the images that we're putting out in the world. And I say we as if, you know, we're not the ones putting out the majority of the content. So we have to be more mindful of what we consume, the content that we consume. And so I think it's, you know, upon every Black parent to be, you know, to make sure that they're feeding their Black children the information and the images that are going to, number one, help them cultivate their sense of Black identity and create their sense of value around their Africanness and their Blackness, however you want to articulate that, you know. So it's not just who you are, but it's who you are, and it's a good thing, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's an amazing thing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as you were working at the African American Art and Culture, I'm going to start that sentence over again.
It's all right.
When you were working at the African American Art and Culture Center in San Francisco, what are some of the type of things, if any, that came to you as new epiphanies or deeper level of awareness or new experiences?
I guess one of the things is some unfortunate realities of working in the Black community. I've witnessed 2 fights on site between members of the community, and it was unfortunate that it wasn't like a gang related fight, like it was a domestic violence dispute. And like the interesting thing was, like, the chick was throwing hands. She was ready, she didn't care. And the dude, he's like, pushing her. I don't think he was like throwing fists back, but like they had 2 separate altercations. One was in our parking lot, one was right in front of the building. But just like the lack of situational awareness when both of these situations happen. The first one, again, being in the parking lot, and my bosses ran from the third floor downstairs to go break up the fight. And then the second one, I think the dude was driving, and the girl went and cut him off, and they pulled over like literally right in front of the door, and they started going out, and they started yelling, cussing, and then just, and I'm just like, whoa, yo, you can't just be fighting in front of the building. Like, we're not trying to get the cops called. And fortunately, the cops didn't get called on both occasions. But like, just a simple thought, it's like, okay, we got, Black folks fighting. Does anybody have a gun? Is like, are the cops gonna get called? Because if the cops get called, now somebody's gonna go to jail for domestic violence. And it's like all these things within like seconds, right? And then on a separate occasion, this Black lady had her car towed because she was, parking in the wrong spot or whatever. She got the warnings. And so she comes in and she starts cussing me out. And I'm like, I just worked the front desk. I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden she grabs my front desk laptop and she took off. And I tried to chase her. And I'm, excuse me, I'm over here in my head like, I cannot be chasing a woman down the street in this community. This is not safe. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, that's my laptop. And that's just working. So,
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy.
I feel like
yeah, go.
I feel like that's one of the things that hurts us so much is the lack of education, the lack of awareness of who we are, who we could be, leads us to the I don't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? And so many in our community have that I don't give a fuck because they don't have they don't feel like they have the opportunity, or they don't have the opportunity to better themselves. So at that point, what do? It's just, okay, I throw my hands up, fuck it. I'm just gonna go off how I feel. And that's where it comes out. You know what I'm saying? And I see that so much. I mean, I know so many talented, so many smart men in particular who will fly off the handle and to do the dumbest shit right in front of everybody and don't care even in the moment, even though they know it. And people are like, yo, relax. Because they have that angst, that anger, that depression, that
trauma.
That trauma that they just let it go. And I find myself fighting it all the time. My whole youth was that, you know what I'm saying? And even now I try to fight it. And I'm a quiet fighter. I fight within myself so people don't see it. But every single day, man, I want to jump out my skin and just go nuts on somebody. You know what I'm saying? But luckily for me, I've had the training and I've had the awareness to be able to hold it in. But so many don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that really is an outcome of so many different forces, right? Part of it is like the lack of love for oneself because our community's been so marginalized, so oppressed, so broken down. We are so dysfunctional as a society in so many ways, particularly in certain pockets of our community. So like Pearcey, the African American Art and Culture Center for our viewers, is in the Western Addition part of San Francisco, which is a historically Black neighborhood that has undergone 2 generations of intense gentrification. The Black population has been minimized so much in San Francisco that there's actually a movie out right now called The Last Black Man in San Francisco. But the neighborhood that Pearcey's talking about is, it's a period that a community in San Francisco that has really suffered the brunt of all of the discriminatory practices in African American history, from redlining to gentrification to lack of resources, being underfunded, undersupported, you name it. And it's that way in so many Black communities all over the country. So when we look at this behavior, right, people tend to focus on behaviors like, oh, this person stole something, these people are ghetto, they're ratchet, they're fighting, they're loud, they're this, they're that. All of those things are the outcome of the systems of oppression that have plagued us for so many years. It is all of those things: being disconnected from your people, feeling like you have no hope and no future, feeling like you're not valued, loved, or respected in this society, having things taken away, having your dreams, destroyed one after another. I mean, even when you haven't experienced things personally, when you know how pervasive it is throughout the Black community and how far back it goes in history, it gives you a sense of hopelessness and despair. When I hear about, and like I've never owned a home, and so that's one of my goals, is to own my own home. And when I think about all the African American people, even as recent as the 2009 economic crash that happened because these predators were, issuing these predatory loans mostly to Black and brown people, that not only destroyed their lives and their credit and their finances, but turned the entire world upside down. And here we are 10 years later. White people have already come out of it and recovered. We've had the longest history of economic expansion in the United States history, but Black people are still left behind. We're the ones who get hit the hardest, and we're the last ones to recover. And, when you know all of this stuff, it gives you a sense of frustration and despair and resentment and anger. And all of these things culminate in these behaviors, right, of somebody who would just like walk into a place and snatch a laptop and run out and just be like, hey, yo, I'm getting mine, I'm getting what I can, or I don't give a F, I'm gonna stand right here in front of this building and and go off on this dude or on this woman or whatever, and have our beef right here in public. People stop caring when they feel like there's no hope, like it's not gonna make a difference. So I'm always, I don't want to make excuses for anybody, but there are a lot of very tangible, real, measurable, documented reasons for all of the funky stuff in the Black community that even those of us, like, who know better, who have learned better, whatever, within our community, we may frown upon those things. We frown upon those things just as much as somebody outside of our community is going to frown upon those things. It's just that we understand the cultural context in which those things are happening. We don't like, I don't like the fact that when I go into the mall that I'm going to be looked at and watched, to see if I'm going to shoplift. And at the same time, I worked in a mall. I know how many Black women go in and shoplift. And I understand that I'm going to be a victim of that perception because somebody else, set that expectation. I don't like it, but at least I understand it.
At the same time, Shauna, it's like there's twice as many poor white
White people. Oh yeah.
ghetto people, you know, than there
More,
are black
not more
people.
than twice.
We're the ones who are put on that
Yeah.
pedestal. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, more than twice.
Yeah.
More than twice the amount of white women are ghetto welfare queens.
Yes.
More than, because remember, we're like 13% of the population.
Yes.
And you talk about the economic status of most people in America, you're talking about a whole lot of white people, a good 30% of the white population that's living, you know, they're either the working poor or they're at or below the poverty line. They're on welfare, they're stealing, they're doing all the same ratchet ghetto shit that black folks are doing, but we just get pinned with the stigma. Yep. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm not making excuses for them, and I'm not saying that we're, you know, that we're so different or what have you. But I'm saying there's a lot of stuff because like they're doing all that stuff, right? They're doing all that stuff, and they don't even have the cultural, historical oppression that we have. Yep. So it's, you know, that much more. It's that much worse for us and our people. That's my point.
Yeah.
And off your point earlier, what you were saying with regards to going shopping in the mall and people just assuming that, oh, you might be up to something, like Project Level, which is a youth organization at the African American Art and Culture Complex, literally this week was in Forever 21 at Union Square, and the manager evidently thought they were shoplifting and called the cops on them. And yet, that wasn't their first time in Forever 21. They've spent thousands of dollars there. And in this particular occasion, it was a few of the youth and their mentor, Big Rich, and they were buying clothes for a video shoot. So when the cops come, they search all the bags, everything checks out, and they go to the manager to try to get an apology, and she's nowhere to be found. And she's holed up in her office trying to hide simply because she felt like she was the victim now. And so they returned all the stuff, and you can see the video. The Big Rich posted his personal video on Instagram. This got featured on KPIX News this week. So like what you were just talking about is real, and it just the crazy fact that it happened to the folks that I worked with too. And you know, these are youth that are entrepreneurs. Like one quote that he said that really stuck is that we have too much money, too much influence, too much power to ever steal from anybody. Right? And yet, just like with Barbecue Betty, we got some type of somebody that gets a little intimidated with black folks just trying to, you know, live a regular life.
Right.
And, you know, we can't barbecue, unless we're gonna get cops called on us. We can't, you know, have a party or a social gathering without the cops. We can't evidently go shopping without the cops getting called on us. You know, if there's too many black people in one car, they're probably gonna get pulled over. You know, and you have all of these things, and that's just you trying to be normal. You're not even doing anything wrong.
Yeah, it's just that assumption of guilt. You know, I'm particularly sensitive to what you just described with Project Level because my daughter was in Project Level for about 3 years. And I could just imagine, you know, I am a parent of a kid from Project Level. If my daughter had been in that situation, I would be going through the roof right now. It absolutely infuriates me. And like you said, it's like just being black. There's this assumption of guilt. There's this assumption that you're up to something no good. And I just read a article recently that was written by a woman talking about her father, who's an elderly man who lives in Southern California, and he owns a house. He's been living in his house for 30 years. 30 years. He's retired, he's ill, and every day he has a habit now of just walking to the corner of his block and back home on the days where he has the strength to get up and go out and walk. And sometimes he walks around the block, but sometimes he only makes it to the corner and back. And recently he's walking, just made like 100 feet outside of his front door where he's lived for 30 years, and the cops pulled him over. And pulled over and started questioning him. Yeah. And we're talking about an elderly man who's obviously sick and barely able to make it to the end of the block. And they pulled him over and questioned him out in front of his own house. You know, so I mean, like the stories keep stacking up, and we know they're looking for any excuse. And it doesn't matter. You know, I look at, baby Tamir Rice. You know, I look at his picture and I'm like, he was just a little boy, you know, and to me, he was just a baby, right? I mean, I'm a parent. And when I see a kid, Kimani and I, we're both parents, you know, a kid that young, that's a baby, you know, and he was light skinned, didn't matter what color his skin color is. It doesn't matter if you are of African descent, you could potentially have a target on your back, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we have to be aware of. And as we're talking about, you know, the importance of parents, you know, really shaping the identity of their kids, it's so important that they you know, that each one of us teach our kids those realities, those very harsh, painful realities, so that you're not going out in the world, you know, not knowing what to expect, in terms of how the world may perceive you. You don't want to bias your kids, but you want them to have a reality check from a very young age to say, like, hey, you know, you can't act like everybody else.
Unfortunately, that does bias your kids, you know. Just,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
I said, unfortunately, it does bias your kids. Just for anybody, it biases us because we have to deal with it, and we have to be on lookout for it, prepared for it. And just even bringing that up with my daughters and my son is just every single time. Like I could see the angst and the frustration and even a little bit of anger building up in them, even though, you know what I'm saying, I'm mixed and my kids have some mixture in them, you know what I'm saying, and we live in a white community, but it's heartbreaking to see.
Yeah, I remember one time I was going grocery shopping with my daughter, and my daughter's an adult. She's 23 years old now, and at the time she may have been like 18, 19 years old. And, you know, I use these recyclable, reusable cloth shopping bags. So she had one of those, and I had mine, and she was going to do her own shopping and get the things that she wanted. And I said, okay, that's fine, you know. And she started shopping into the bag and saying, like, I'll just use my shopping bag and I'll bring it up to the counter. And I said, you can't do that. It looks like you're shoplifting. And she's like, oh, Mom, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. And I said, Tasha, yeah, it's a big deal. I said, you got to stop doing that right now. You have to understand that other people are looking at you and it looks like you are shoplifting. You have to stop that now. And it took, like, we had to argue for a minute in the grocery store before she finally got it. And she kind of looked around, and I saw this moment, and I swear to God, it broke my heart, because it was that moment of, oh yeah, I am Black. I am different. You know, I am in danger. I could put myself in danger if I do this, you know. And it's just devastating as a parent that you have to teach your child that, but it's the reality of the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm. It's an unfortunate reality, and it just goes to show back to what we were talking about earlier about the importance of that education, because if we were such an equitable society, you know, we would at least know a fair amount of each culture, I would say, so that when you look and you see another person, you're not going to immediately have a bunch of assumptions just pop off, you know. But I feel like back in school, we're not taught to really truly appreciate every human being. I think that golden rule and all that blase blah gets said, but you know, if in the education system it was really equitable to treat everybody this, not even just the same, but just with respect. Like if you had that, at least a minimal amount of respect for somebody else, those negative like stereotypes aren't always gonna pop up. They may still, but you're not gonna be like, oh, what are they doing? Oh, maybe I should go get security. Like, you know, stuff like that. It's just that respect of other people and their differences, and then now we're seeing that with the kids in the border. You know, it's a lot of the administration does not respect brown people, and that's why they feel it's okay to just lock up their parents and lock up the kids. If to me, I would see that situation, I'd say, if you want to lock up the parents, but take the kids to a foster system or something, so they can at least go to school. Don't leave them all locked up too, because what do the kids do? And it's just like a lack of respect. And unfortunately, you start going towards a slippery slope. You start losing a systematic respect for people, and the pushback gets a little bit softer, and the injustices will only just like seep in a little bit more, the less that people stop like voicing themselves, right, in an injustice. So I think it was crazy to see how that kind of a white lash happened after Obama left, and all of a sudden we were looking at the 2016 elections, and this wall of red just cuts the country in half. I think that it just goes to show, like, after everything that was said about Trump and the things that came out, it goes down to the respect.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't respect people. But if you're in your head, you are more like him, that you're comfortable with it, you're fine, and it's not an issue.
Yeah,
I agree. It's that lack of respect. Like they looking down on these brown people, like they don't have anything to bring to our culture. Like the whole history of the United States is about bring us your tired, bring us your weary, bring us your people, so we can build this great land that we have. And here we have people coming, leaving someplace that they're struggling, but all we're looking at is their struggle and not what the potential that they can bring to our country is, because of that lack of respect. You know what I'm saying? And history's proven. You know what I'm saying? The people who come to this country contribute greatly. Most immigrants don't commit crimes. Most immigrants come here to better their chances and to build their families. But for some reason, there's those people who are threatened by it because of their lack of respect.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Black community. They. I mean, even though it's even more proven what the Black community done is for this country. As far as we have the #1 culture in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like that should say something to you. You know what I'm saying? Like if all these people like us, then we can't be that bad. You know what I'm saying? It's a trip.
Well, before we lead into a conversation about Trump and immigration policies, I think that's a whole other episode. We've covered a lot of conversation, a lot of topics and issues so far. And I think I'm going to just kind of come full circle, right, with this idea of respect of culture, cultural appreciation, that it should start in the classroom. It should start at the youngest ages or earliest developmental stages in life as possible. And that's part of one of the things that is the problem and the solution, right? The problem is the lack of cultural appreciation and respect for other cultures, the lack of knowledge of different cultures that can inform our understanding, to reduce the fear, the stereotypes, and all of the other things that actually feed any other ethnicity's idea of supremacy or oppression. So when you reduce those things, you create a more equitable society, and the classroom is the best place for that to start. And in the family, right? In the families, teaching our children, people of any ethnicity should be teaching their children how to love and appreciate themselves for who they are as human beings and within their cultural context, and at the same time teaching them to love and appreciate other people's cultural heritage as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you to our guest, Pearcey Bastiani, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us. It's been a pleasure having you on Black Men Speak. I hope you'll come back and be a guest again, and we can continue this great conversation.
Awesome. Look forward to it. It's been a great honor to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, Keith, I'll see you again soon.
Yep.
All right.